The night Vivienne Alcott walked into the Ashford ball in a dress with a jagged hem, and her chin raised exactly 1 inch higher than usual, the Duke of Ashford was already watching the door. He had been watching it for 20 minutes. He told himself he didn't know why. He was lying. What he did not know, what he could not have known, standing beside his mother with a glass of champagne he had not touched, and a conversation he was not following, was that upstairs in the guest room at the end of the East Corridor, Vivienne Alcott had spent 40 minutes staring at a dress that had been fine the night before and was not fine anymore, and had made a decision that most people in that ballroom would spend the rest of the season talking about. Not because of the dress, because of the way she wore it. It had been a clean cut. That was the thing Vivienne kept coming back to, standing in the middle of her room at 7 in the morning, with the dress held up in both hands and the early light coming through the curtains at an angle that made everything look more forgiving than it was. A clean cut, not a tear, not a snag, not the kind of damage that happened when fabric caught on something in the dark. One long, deliberate line across the front of the skirt, starting just below the left hip, ending several inches above the hem on the right. The scissors had been very sharp. Vivienne set the dress down on the bed. She sat beside it and looked at it for a long moment, the ivory silk, the careful embroidery at the bodice that her mother had chosen, the ruined skirt, and she breathed in slowly through her nose and out through her mouth, the way her father had taught her when she was 7 years old and the world was being unreasonable and crying was not going to help. She had been a guest at Ashford Manor for 4 days. She had been invited by the Duke himself, a formal invitation, correctly addressed, delivered to her father's house in London 3 weeks ago. She had accepted correctly, arrived correctly, conducted herself correctly in every drawing room and dining room and morning walk the 4 days had required. She had been pleasant to the other guests, attentive at dinner, careful in every conversation. She had also, apparently, made an enemy. She thought about the Duchess. The Duchess of Ashford was a small woman who took up a great deal of space, not physically, but atmospherically, the way certain people do, as though the air around them had different properties than the air elsewhere. She had been watching Vivienne since the first evening. Not rudely, never rudely, nothing so easily named. Just watching with the patient, assessing quality of a woman who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for events to confirm it. Vivienne had noticed. She had said nothing. She had smiled when smiled at, answered when spoken to, and gone to bed each night with the careful, deliberate serenity of someone who understood that the best response to being watched was to give the watcher nothing interesting. Apparently that had not been sufficient. She looked at the dress. The ball was tonight. Every guest in the house was attending. Her trunks had been searched. She knew this because her maid had mentioned, carefully, that some things had been moved. And the ivory dress was the only one suitable, the only one she had brought for a formal evening, because one did not pack for 6 formal evenings when invited for 4 days, and one had been raised to be practical. She had options. She could go to the Duchess and say nothing, simply present the dress, let the Duchess see it, let the silence do the work. This was clean, but it required the Duchess to feel something, and Vivienne was not certain the Duchess was capable of feeling the right thing. She could go to the Duke. She sat with this option for a moment. The Duke of Ashford was 29 years old, and had the kind of face that had been arranged by nature into something unfairly compelling, and had been arranged by experience into something considerably more guarded. He was not unkind. She did not think he was unkind. He was careful, and he was watchful, and he had sat across from her at dinner on the second evening, and asked her 3 questions about her father's work in a way that suggested he had actually listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. She had thought about him more than was strictly useful. She could go to him now, show him the dress, let him draw his own conclusions about who had been in her room with a pair of sharp scissors the night before his mother's ball. She considered this for approximately 10 seconds, then she set it aside. Not because she was afraid of what he would say, because she already knew. She had watched him for 4 days with the same careful attention she gave to everything, and she had seen clearly without drama the specific quality of a man who understood what was happening around him and had chosen, for reasons she could not yet fully see, not to act on what he understood. He knew his mother. He had always known his mother. And he had invited Vivienne anyway and said nothing, and watched from a careful distance, and that told her something she was still deciding what to do with. She stood up. She picked up the dress. She turned it over in her hands, the damage, the silk, the embroidery her mother had chosen, and she thought about what her father had said once, a long time ago, when she was 7 years old and the world was being unreasonable. The only way to make a scissors feel small, Vivienne, is to make it irrelevant. She called for her maid. It took 2 hours. Her maid, a practical, unsentimental woman named Goss who had been with Vivienne since she was 15 and had never once suggested that a problem was insurmountable, looked at the dress for approximately 4 seconds, said nothing, and went to find her sewing kit. What they produced, over the course of 2 hours and 3 cups of tea and a great deal of concentrated silence, was not the dress as it had been. It could not be that. The cut was too long, the silk too delicate, the damage too deliberate to simply be undone. What it became instead was something else. The damaged portion of the skirt had been turned under and restitched, not invisibly but cleanly, creating an asymmetrical hem that was shorter on the left than the right, unconventional in a way that was either a disaster or a statement depending on who was looking at it. Goss had added 3 small tucks at the waist to compensate for the altered fall of the fabric. The overall effect was unusual, structured, intentional. It looked, in other words, like a choice. Vivienne stood in front of the mirror at 7:30 and looked at herself for a long moment. The dress was not what it had been, but it was something. It was, she thought, possibly something better, not because the damage had been repaired, but because it had been refused, transformed, turned into a thing that stood on its own terms instead of the terms that had been given to it. She thought about the Duchess's scissors. She thought about the Duke at the dinner table, asking 3 questions and listening to the answers. She picked up her gloves. "Goss," she said. "Miss Vivienne," Goss said. "If anyone asks about the hem—" "I'll say it's the latest from Paris," Goss said, without looking up from where she was tidying the room. "They won't ask twice." Vivienne put on her gloves. She walked to the door. She went downstairs. She heard the ballroom before she reached it, the music, the noise, the particular warm density of a large number of people gathered in a lit room on a cold night. The corridor outside was bright and busy, guests still arriving, the flow of silk and conversation moving steadily toward the double doors at the far end. Vivienne joined it. She walked at a measured pace, not hurrying, not hesitating. Her chin at the angle her father had taught her, not high enough to look arrogant, not low enough to look uncertain, exactly 1 inch higher than usual. She reached the doors. She stepped through. The ballroom at Ashford Manor held 200 people comfortably and was currently holding closer to 240. It was, by any measure, full of noise and light and movement, the kind of room that swallowed individuals and turned them into atmosphere. Vivienne walked 3 steps in and stopped. She did not stop because she was uncertain. She stopped because she had learned a long time ago that a room like this one needed a moment, needed to understand that someone had arrived, not announced, not dramatically, not with any visible effort, simply present, simply there, still enough that the motion of the room moved around her rather than carrying her with it. She stood. The whispers began at the left side of the room and moved right, not loudly, not all at once. The way a fire catches, one point of heat reaching the next. She heard the quality of it change as it spread, the initial uncertainty, the question, and then the longer, more complicated murmur of people looking at the hem and looking at her face and trying to reconcile the two. She did not look at the whispers. She looked straight ahead. And at the far end of the room, standing beside his mother with a glass of champagne he had not touched, the Duke of Ashford was looking directly at her. He had been watching the door. He had been watching it, she realized, for some time. Their eyes met across 240 people and 20 feet of polished floor and one ruined, remade, utterly deliberate dress. Vivienne held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away first, not because she was retreating, because she had decided, on the walk down the corridor, that tonight she was going to make him come to her, and she wanted to give him somewhere to come from. The Duke did not come to her immediately. Vivienne had not expected him to. A man who had spent 4 days watching from a careful distance was not going to cross a ballroom in the first 10 minutes. Not with his mother beside him, not with 240 people watching the door, where Vivienne Alcott had just arrived in a dress that was already being discussed in at least 4 separate conversations. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and moved into the room and began the particular work of being at a party alone. The whispers had settled into something more complicated by the time Fenimore found her, not the initial shock of the entrance, but the longer murmur of people who had looked at the hem and looked at her face and were trying to reconcile the two. He appeared at her elbow at the 20-minute mark, young and open-faced, and transparently relieved to have found her. "Miss Alcott, you look that is good evening." "Good evening, Lord Fenimore," she said. He looked at his champagne, then carefully, "The Duchess mentioned this morning that you might be leaving early, before the end of the week." Vivienne looked at the dancers. "Did she?" "She seemed certain of it." A pause. "I told her I hadn't heard anything of the kind." She turned to look at him. He was studying his glass with the slightly pained expression of a young man doing something that made him uncomfortable because he had decided it was right. "Thank you," she said, and meant it differently than she usually meant it. They danced one set. Fenimore was earnest and slightly too careful about the footwork, and he made her laugh once, which was more than most men managed in an entire evening. By the end of it, she had decided she liked him genuinely and without complication. She was aware, throughout, of where the Duke was. She did not look, but she felt the shift, the way his position changed during the dance, moving from the far end toward the center, not directly, the way a man moves when he is going somewhere and doesn't want to appear to be going there. When the music stopped and she straightened from her curtsy, she found without looking for it that he was 20 feet away and facing the dance floor directly. Their eyes met. This time he held it. She looked away first, not because she was retreating, because she had decided on the walk down the corridor that tonight she was going to make him come to her, and she wanted to give him somewhere to come from. It was the Duchess who found her 20 minutes later. She appeared at Vivienne's elbow near the east wall, with the smooth arrival of a woman who had been moving toward her for some time, and had timed it to look spontaneous. "Miss Alcott, how lovely. I had heard you were feeling unwell this afternoon." "I feel perfectly well," Vivienne said pleasantly. "Thank you for your concern." "Your gown, how original." The pause before original did its work. "I do hope the evening has been comfortable. I know these large parties can be rather overwhelming for those who aren't accustomed." Vivienne held her champagne glass and looked at the Duchess with the mild, attentive expression she had developed for exactly these moments. "I'm quite comfortable," she said. "It's a beautiful ball." "Isn't it?" The Duchess glanced toward the dancers, then back. "I do think these evenings are so important for clarity, for everyone to see everyone else clearly, understand where they fit." A small pause. "Don't you agree?" "I think clarity is always useful," Vivienne said. The Duchess looked at her just for a moment, the warmth shifting slightly at the edges. "James is very dutiful," she said, then lower, more private. "He takes his responsibilities very seriously. The estate, the name, the expectations of his position." She paused. "I think sometimes people mistake duty for feeling. It can look very similar from a distance." She smiled, touched Vivienne's arm briefly. "Enjoy the evening, Miss Alcott," she said, and moved away. Vivienne stood very still and looked at the dancers. Duty for feeling. It can look very similar from a distance. You did not warn someone away from something that was not a threat. She picked up a fresh glass of champagne. She thought, good. It was during the supper interval that she went to the balcony. The room had become warm and she wanted 10 minutes of cold air, and she was done waiting for something to happen to her. She walked to the far end, away from the doors, and stood with her hands on the cold stone and looked at the dark grounds below. She heard the door open behind her. She knew, before she turned, who it was. The Duke walked the length of the balcony and stopped at a correct distance with the slightly too careful stride of a man executing a decision before he could think better of it. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. He closed it. "Miss Alcott." "I said don't." Quiet. Not cold, something more complicated than cold, something that had been building since 7 that morning when she stood in her room with a dress in her hands and a very clean cut in the silk. "Whatever you came out here to say, don't say it yet." He was quiet. She turned and looked at him directly, fully, without the careful angles she had been maintaining all evening. She looked at his face in its unguarded state and thought that he was, underneath the carefulness, not a bad man. This did not resolve anything. "You knew," she said, factually. "This morning you knew before this morning." He did not look away. "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "No." "To her," Vivienne said, "or to me?" "To either of you," he said. She had prepared for a managed version of this, a version that acknowledged the fact while redirecting it into something more comfortable. She was not entirely ready for this one. "Why?" she asked. He looked at the grounds. "Because I have spent a long time allowing my mother to manage things. Because it is easier than the alternative, and I told myself it was harmless, and I have known, for some time, that I was wrong about that and continued anyway." He paused. "That is not a justification. It is an explanation. I understand the difference." "I came to tell you I am sorry," he said. "Not for my mother, for my silence, which is mine." He turned to look at her. "I am sorry, Miss Alcott." The balcony was very cold. Inside, the music had started again. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. "The dress is ruined," she said. "I know," he said. "Goss made it into something else. It took 2 hours." "I know. It should not have needed to be made into something else." "No," he said, "it should not." She turned back to the grounds. "Go back inside," she said. "Dance with whoever your mother has arranged. Finish the evening correctly." She paused. "And tomorrow morning come and find me before anyone else is up." "Why?" he said quietly. "Because you came out here and told the truth when you could have told me something easier." She paused. "And I think that deserves a morning." She heard him breathe. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Before 7, she said. The balcony door opened, the warmth and music flooding through, and then closed, and the cold and quiet returned. Vivienne stood alone at the far end with her hands on the stone, and the dark park below her, and the owl somewhere in the trees calling once before it went silent. She stood there for a long time. Then she went back inside. She was at the bottom of the east garden stairs at 6:30. Not because she had asked him to come to her, she had, and she stood by it, but because she had woken at 5 with the particular, slightly inconvenient clarity of a mind that had finished processing something in the night and wanted to move before the rest of the house caught up. She had lain in bed for 20 minutes attempting to be sensible about this. Then she had dressed quietly, without waking Goss, and come downstairs. The house was not entirely asleep. The kitchens were already moving. She could hear it distantly. The low early morning sounds of a large household beginning its day, fires being laid, water being heated, the particular rhythm of a staff that had been doing this long enough that it required no direction. A housemaid passed her in the lower corridor and looked up with the startled expression of someone encountering a guest at an hour when guests were not supposed to exist, recovered quickly, and disappeared. Vivienne went through the side door and down the east garden stairs, and stood on the gravel path at the bottom and looked at the morning. It was cold and very clear, the kind of morning that arrived after fog, when the world had decided to be precise. The gardens lay sharp and still in the early light, every edge defined, every shadow exact. The park beyond was just beginning to resolve itself from the gray of pre-dawn into its actual colors, the dark green of the hedgerows, the silver of the frosted grass, the deep brown of the bare trees at the far boundary. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets and breathed. She was not, she told herself, nervous. This was partially true. He came at 10 minutes to 7. Not from the side door, from the main garden entrance, which meant he had come around the long way, which meant he had also been awake for some time and had also made decisions about where to walk and had chosen, for whatever reason, the longer route. He was wearing a dark coat and no hat, and had the look of a man who had slept badly and knew it and had decided not to care. He saw her at the bottom of the stairs and stopped. She looked at him across 20 feet of frosted gravel. He looked back. Then he walked toward her and she waited, and when he reached her he stopped at a correct distance and said, "You're early." "So are you," she said. A pause. The garden was very quiet. The sounds of the waking house muffled by distance and cold air, the birds not yet fully committed to the morning. "I didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did I," she said. He looked at the park. She looked at the park. They stood beside each other in the early morning with 6 inches of cold air between them and the frosted grass stretching away toward the tree line, and neither of them said anything for long enough that it stopped being awkward and became something else, something that had the quality of a beginning, or of two people arriving at the same place from different directions and taking a moment to confirm it. "Walk," she said. "Yes," he said. They went through the formal garden first, the hedgerows and the gravel paths and the dormant rose beds, everything cut back and precise for winter, the bones of the garden visible without the distraction of flowers. Vivienne walked at her own pace and he matched it, and for a while neither of them spoke, and she thought that this was either very comfortable or very tense, and she was not yet certain which. Then he said, "How long have you known?" She glanced at him. "Known what specifically?" "About the way things have been managed." A pause. "About my mother." Vivienne considered this. "Since the first evening," she said, "the way she watched me at dinner, it was thorough, the kind of thorough that means a decision has already been made." He was quiet. "I didn't know about the dress until this morning," she said. "I suspected something. There had been small things the 2 days before. Things moved in my room. A letter I was expecting that didn't arrive." She paused. "But the dress was more direct." "She has never been that direct before," he said. "It was not a defense. It was, she thought, the opposite of a defense, the admission of a man acknowledging the full shape of something he had been looking at partially." "She felt it necessary," Vivienne said. "That's its own information." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "She has been managing things for a long time," Vivienne said. "Quietly, carefully, the way you manage things when you are confident of the outcome. The dress was not quiet or careful." She paused. "She was afraid of something. People become direct when they are afraid." He walked beside her in silence for a moment. "Of you," he said. "Of something," Vivienne said. "I think she is afraid of what happens if you see clearly, without management." The path curved around the far end of the rose garden and opened onto a longer walk that ran beside the park boundary, the frosted grass of the park on one side and the dark hedgerow on the other. They turned onto it without discussion, still walking. "I have not," he said slowly, "seen clearly for a long time." He paused. "I think I have known this, in the way you know something you have decided not to examine. It is easier to allow things to run as they run when you do not." He stopped. "When you are not presented with a reason to question it." "And now you are," Vivienne said. "And now I am," he said. She looked at the park. The light was strengthening, the gray of early morning giving way to the thin, provisional gold of a winter sun that had decided, reluctantly, to make an effort. The frosted grass caught it and held it, each blade precise and separate, the whole of it glittering faintly with the spent cold of the night. "What will you do?" she asked. "About your mother." He was quiet for a long moment. "Say something," he said. "What I should have said some time ago." Another pause. "She will not receive it well." "No," Vivienne agreed. "She believes she is protecting something," he said. The estate, the name, though, she has a version of things in which everything she does is in service of something larger than herself. I think she believes it entirely. He paused. That does not make it right, but it is the thing that makes it complicated. Vivienne thought about the Duchess's face at dinner, the particular quality of her management, the warmth of it, the way it was almost indistinguishable from genuine care if you were not paying attention. She thought about scissors and clean cuts, and the fact that a woman who loved her son could do those things and not see the contradiction. Love is not a justification, she said, but it is an explanation. He looked at her. You are very even about this. I'm not even, she said. I'm precise. There's a difference. Something moved across his face, the ghost of something, almost a smile, the same thing she had seen across the ballroom last night and across the dinner table on the second evening. Present and then gone. My father, he said after a moment, used to say that the most useful thing a person could do was learn the difference between what they felt and what they thought. He said most people never did. He paused. He was very good at that distinction himself, better than I am. When did he die? She asked. 11 years ago, he said. I was 19. I had been away school and then a brief time on the continent. I came back and I did not come back in time. A pause. My mother has managed things since. 11 years. Vivienne thought about 19 years old and a father and not coming back in time, and she thought about the specific shape that left, not just grief, but the grief that has guilt running through it, the kind that makes you careful in a particular way, the kind that makes you defer to the person who was there when you were not. She stepped into a space, Vivienne said quietly, when you needed someone to. Yes, he said, and I let her stay in it. He looked at the park. Long after I was capable of, he stopped. Long after there was no longer a reason. They walked. The path curved again, beginning to arc back toward the house, the main facade just visible through the bare trees, the stone of it pale in the winter morning light, the windows beginning to warm as the house woke behind them. Miss Alcott, he said. She waited. I should like if you are willing to begin again. He said it carefully, the way he said things he had thought about, not rehearsed but considered. Not from last night, not from the dress. He paused. From this morning, from here. Vivienne looked at the path ahead. She thought about the scissors and the 2 hours with Goss and the dress that had been made into something else. She thought about a room going quiet. She thought about a man who had walked the long way around the garden and arrived at 10 minutes to 7 and said I didn't sleep without trying to make it mean something it didn't. She thought about what beginning again meant. Not forgetting, she was not the forgetting kind, had never been, and he would need to understand this. Not excusing. Not pretending the entrance hall had been other than it was, or the silence, or the clean cut in the silk. Beginning again meant something different from all of that. It meant choosing, with full knowledge of the cost, to build something on the ground that was actually here rather than the ground you wished were here. She had done this before. She knew the weight of it. She was quiet for long enough that she heard him breathe, the slow, careful breath of a man waiting for something he was not certain he deserved. From here, she said. He looked at her. But not quietly, she said. I will not be managed. I will not be arranged around. If something is happening that concerns me, I am told, directly. She looked at him. I do not hold coats. Something in his face moved, the recognition of it, the specific weight of what she meant, and she watched him take it and not deflect it and not smooth it into something easier, and she thought that this, more than anything else, was what she had needed to see. No, he said, you don't. They stood at the bend in the path, the house ahead of them, the morning light strengthening around them, the garden very still and cold and precise. The drainage easements on the south boundary, she said. Your estate and my father's land. They have been in dispute for 2 years. Your solicitor has not responded to 3 letters. He blinked. I was not aware. I know you weren't, she said. I am telling you now, she paused. Directly. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, "I will have Hargrove address it today." "Good," she said. She began walking toward the house. After a moment, she heard his footsteps beside her, matching her pace, steady, present, neither ahead nor behind. They walked back through the formal garden in the strengthening morning light, past the bare rose beds and the precise hedgerows and the frost that was beginning, slowly, to release its hold on the grass. At the bottom of the east garden stairs, she stopped. He stopped beside her. "Breakfast is at 8, she said. "I'll be there," he said. She looked at him once more, quickly, fully, the look she gave things she was deciding about, and then she went up the stairs and into the house. Behind her, she heard him stand for a moment on the gravel path. Then she heard him follow. Breakfast was at 8. Vivienne came down at 5 minutes past. The breakfast room held 4 guests already: Fenimore, Cartwright, Lady Prewitt, who had arrived the previous afternoon and eaten dinner in her room, and the Duke, who was at the head of the table with a cup of coffee and a letter he set down when she walked in. He stood. She noted this, filed it away. She took the chair 2 down from his, not beside him, not across the room. The distance of someone who had said from here and meant it, but was not going to perform it for an audience. Fenimore looked between them with the expression of a young man, registering something he did not fully understand, but intended to think about later. Lady Prewitt, who had the sharp attention of a woman who had been watching rooms full of people for 60 years, looked at Vivienne's dress, yesterday's dress, the altered hem, worn again this morning without particular deliberation, and said nothing, but something in her expression shifted in a way Vivienne recognized as approval. They ate. The conversation was easy, Fenimore and Cartwright on horses, Lady Prewitt interjecting with the dry precision of someone who knew considerably more than either of them and was rationing it. The Duke contributed 2 observations, both brief. Vivienne ate her toast and listened. It was halfway through the 2nd cup of tea that the Duchess arrived. She came in fully assembled deep blue dress, pearls, the pleasant expression of a woman for whom breakfast was another managed occasion. She took her chair at the foot of the table and looked at Vivienne. Vivienne looked back. The same expression she had been using for 4 days. The Duchess looked at the Duke. Something passed between them, the specific communication of 2 people with a long-established language for it. Vivienne watched it and thought, he hasn't spoken to her yet. She could see the Duchess recalibrating, the almost imperceptible sharpening of her attention. She knew something had changed. She did not yet know what. "Did everyone enjoy the ball?" Lady Prewitt asked into the lull. "Enormously," Fenimore said, with slightly too much enthusiasm. "Miss Alcott," the Duchess said before anyone else could speak, "I do hope you recovered from your difficulty last evening with your gown." A precise pause. These things can be so distressing, particularly when one has brought only a single suitable option. The table went quiet. Vivienne set down her teacup. She looked at the Duchess, and she thought, clearly and without drama, that she had been patient for 4 days and had said from here and meant it, and that from here included this. She was done with different chairs. "It wasn't a difficulty," she said pleasantly. "The dress was damaged. Goss and I altered it." She looked at the Duchess with the same mild expression, except that this time she let something sit underneath it, not anger, clarity. "It took about 2 hours. The result was better than the original, I think." "How resourceful," the Duchess said, "still warm, still smooth, but a fraction of a degree cooler at the edges." "Necessity," Vivienne said. "I find it produces the most interesting results." Lady Prewitt made a small sound, not quite a laugh. She picked up her teacup and looked at the window with an expression of profound neutrality. Fenimore stared at his plate with the focused intensity of a man who had made a firm decision to be invisible. The Duke had gone very still. "I imagine you must be eager to return to London," the Duchess said, "after so many days away from your usual routine." "Not particularly," Vivienne said. "I find the country suits me." She reached for the toast rack. "My father's land borders the south boundary," she said conversationally. The drainage situation along that boundary has been rather outstanding. I spoke with His Grace about it this morning. We're going to have Hargrove take a look." She felt, rather than saw, the shift at the foot of the table. The Duchess's face did not change, but something changed in the room, the barometric quality of it, the pressure difference before a storm. This morning. She had read the Duke's face when she came in and known something had changed. Now she knew the shape of it. Vivienne ate her toast. "His Grace," the Duke said to Hargrove in the doorway with the Morning Post. "After breakfast, the south boundary easements, Miss Alcott's solicitor's letters, I'd like to see all three." "Of course, Your Grace," Hargrove said and withdrew. Cartwright said something about the weather. Lady Prewitt responded with a story about weather in Shropshire that went on for 4 minutes and gave everyone at the table something to look at. That was not the foot of the table, where the Duchess sat with her pearl necklace and an expression that had not visibly changed and had changed completely. Vivienne finished her toast. She found the Duke in the estate office at 10:30. Hargrove had the 3 letters spread on the desk. The Duke was reading the third with the focused, slightly grim expression of a man discovering the full dimensions of something he had allowed to go unaddressed. "The first letter was received in March," Hargrove said to the filing cabinet. "It did not reach His Grace's desk. The second in June, also held. The third in September I delivered personally." A pause. "His Grace was informed it pertained to a routine matter that had already been resolved." The Duke set down the letter. "It's not only the easements," Vivienne said. He looked at her. "The boundary itself. The original survey from my father's deed and your estate records don't agree, by about 40 feet. She paused. "My solicitor has been trying to raise this for 2 years." "I was not aware," he said carefully, "of a boundary discrepancy." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you now directly." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "all right." Hargrove set a folder on the desk between them, thick, organized, the work of a man who had been maintaining a record against the day someone would finally ask for it. They worked for 2 hours. Somewhere in the middle of the second hour Hargrove brought tea without being asked, and the Duke poured it and handed her the cup with the correct amount of milk, and she looked at it, and then at him. "You had it the same way at breakfast," he said. "I notice things," he said, "when I am paying attention." "And when you're not," she said, a pause. "Then apparently I hand people their coats," he said. She looked at him. He had not intended it to be heavy, had offered it as a thing that could be said between them without catastrophe. She felt something shift, not resolve, but something moved from the category of wound into the category of history, which was quite a lot. "When you are paying attention," she said, "what do you notice?" He looked at her directly. "Currently." "Yes." "That you hold a pencil the way someone taught you correctly, and you decided to hold it your own way," he said. "That you've looked at the clock twice in the last hour, but not because you wanted to leave, because you were tracking something. That you knew about the boundary discrepancy before you came here and chose not to raise it until I had given you a reason to trust me with it." He paused. "That nothing about you is accidental." Vivienne looked at the survey map. "The boundary discrepancy has been known since my father bought the land," she said. 12 years ago. He chose not to raise it because he liked your father. He said it could wait until there was a reason." A silence. "He sent me here," she said, "because he thought there might be one." The Duke looked at her. Outside, a clock struck 1. Neither of them moved. She was crossing the main hall at 2:30 when the Duchess found her. They walked. The Duchess was quiet for a moment, assembling something. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "I rarely am," Vivienne said. "I formed an impression. I believe it may have been incomplete." She paused. "I love my son. I have perhaps, in loving him, made decisions that were not." She stopped. "I think I owe you the full account, not the managed version." Vivienne looked at the corridor ahead. "The dress," the Duchess said. "Yes," Vivienne said. "I cannot find the right words for what that was," the Duchess said. I have been trying for 3 days and I cannot find them." "No," Vivienne said, "there aren't any." "I was afraid," the Duchess said, simply, "of the wrong things in the wrong directions, but afraid." She looked ahead. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and that I was wrong." Vivienne stood in the corridor and looked at this woman without her armor, and thought about scissors and clean cuts and from here. "I know you are," she said. "I don't move quickly with forgiveness. I think you should know that." "Yes," the Duchess said, "I thought as much." "But I'm not interested in keeping score," Vivienne said. "What happened, happened. What happens next is what I am interested in." The Duchess looked at her for a long moment. "He chose well," she said quietly. "Better than I deserve." She turned and walked back down the corridor, small and upright and entirely herself. Vivienne watched her go and thought that it was possible, not certain, not simple, but possible, that the Duchess of Ashford was not entirely the woman she had spent 4 days believing her to be. She turned and continued toward the estate office. She had a letter to write to her solicitor. The letter took 40 minutes. Vivienne wrote it at the small desk in her room with the afternoon light coming through the window at the flat, lateral angle of a winter sun that had decided it had done enough and was preparing to leave. She wrote clearly and precisely, the way she wrote everything, no preamble, no softening, the facts in the order that made them most useful, the boundary discrepancy, the 3 letters, the meeting with Hargrove that morning and what it had produced. At the end she wrote, "I believe the matter will be addressed. I will write again when I have confirmation." She sealed it, set it aside for the morning post. Then she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and looked at the window. She was, she thought, in a peculiar position. She had come to Ashford Manor with a letter of introduction and a solicitor's instructions, and a father who had sent her because he thought there might be a reason. She had arrived and been given a coat to hold and seated in the wrong chair, and had a dress cut in the night. And she had stayed anyway, not because of the land, not because of the boundary surveys or the drainage easements or any of the practical architecture that had brought her here. She had stayed because a man had walked the long way around a garden and arrived at 10 minutes to 7 and said I didn't sleep without trying to make it mean something it didn't. She was, she acknowledged to herself, inconsiderably deeper than she had intended to be. This was inconvenient. It was also, she thought, entirely her own fault, which was somehow both worse and better than if it had happened to her. She had walked into it with her eyes open, had chosen at each step to continue. The garden, the breakfast table, the estate office and the survey maps and the cup of tea with the correct amount of milk. She had not been managed into this. She had walked. She picked up her book, set it down again without opening it, looked at the window. The thing that was inconvenient was not the feeling itself. She had made her peace with that somewhere between the boundary surveys and the clock striking 1. The thing that was inconvenient was the gap. The distance between where they were, 2 people who had said from here in a frost-edged garden at past 6 in the morning, and where they would need to get to before anything could be built. She was not a patient woman by nature. She had built patience through practice, the way you build most useful things deliberately, against resistance, until it became a habit rather than an effort. But she felt its edges now, the places where it was thinner than she would like. She thought about what he still had to do. His mother, the conversation that had not yet happened, not the corridor this afternoon, not the breakfast table that morning, but the real one, the direct one. The one he had said he would have and had not yet had, and which Vivienne could not push him toward without becoming the thing she had said she would not be. She was not going to manage him, which meant she was going to have to wait. She picked up her book again. This time she opened it. Dinner that evening was quieter than the previous nights. Several guests had departed during the afternoon, Cartwright and 2 others, the natural attrition of a house party reaching its final days, leaving 8 at table, which produced a more intimate atmosphere than the ballroom had allowed, and a quality of conversation that had nowhere to hide. Vivienne sat between Fenimore and Lady Prewitt, which was comfortable. The Duke sat at the head of the table and the Duchess at the foot, and for the first time in 4 evenings, neither of them appeared to be performing anything. This was its own kind of tension. Fenimore, who was developing an increasingly fine instinct for the atmosphere of a room, directed most of his conversation toward Lady Prewitt, who received it graciously, and returned it with the dry, measured generosity of a woman who had decided she liked him, and was willing to show it in small doses. Vivienne contributed when addressed, and listened when not, and ate her dinner with the focused appreciation of someone who had not eaten properly since breakfast and was rectifying this. The Duke spoke very little. She was aware of it without looking at him directly, the quality of his silence, the way it was different from his usual careful social management. He was not absent. He was present in the specific way of someone carrying something that had weight and required attention. And she thought she knew what it was, and she thought he knew she knew. And she thought that this particular kind of mutual, unspoken knowledge was its own form of intimacy that she had not anticipated and was not certain what to do with. After the second course, Lady Prewitt said, without particular preamble, "Miss Alcott, your mother was Eleanor Hartley before she married." "Yes." Vivienne looked at her. "Yes." "I thought so." Lady Prewitt nodded with the satisfaction of a woman confirming a long-held suspicion. "I knew her before she married your father. She had a quality." She paused, choosing. "She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and made it more itself, if that means anything." "It means a great deal," Vivienne said. "Thank you." "She died young," Lady Prewitt said, not unkindly, simply. "Yes," Vivienne said, "I was 12. Lady Prewitt looked at her with the clear, unhurried attention of someone who had been watching her all evening and had decided to say what she thought. "You have it too, the quality." She picked up her wine glass. "I thought you should know that someone had noticed." Vivienne looked at her plate. She felt, unexpectedly and inconveniently, something tighten in her chest, not grief exactly, not after 16 years, but the specific warmth of being seen in a particular way, connected to something she had not expected to be connected to tonight. She said, "Thank you." She said it quietly enough that it was only for Lady Prewitt, and Lady Prewitt received it that way, a small nod, a return to her wine, no further elaboration. The conversation moved on. Vivienne did not look at the head of the table. But she was aware, with the particular awareness she had developed over the past 4 days, that the Duke had heard. The drawing room after dinner held 5 of them: Fenimore, Lady Prewitt, a quiet woman named Mrs. Alderton who had said very little all week, and appeared to regard the entire house party as an anthropological exercise, Vivienne, and the Duke, who had come through from the dining room with the expression of a man who had made a decision between the soup and the port and was not going back on it. The Duchess did not come down. Vivienne noted this, said nothing. The fire was good, and the room was warm, and Fenimore and Lady Prewitt fell naturally into a conversation about something Vivienne was not tracking, and Mrs. Alderton sat in the corner with her embroidery and her observations, and Vivienne took a chair near the fire with her book, and the Duke sat 2 chairs away and did not open anything. For 20 minutes neither of them spoke. It was not uncomfortable. This, Vivienne thought, was itself information, that they could sit in the same room in silence after 4 days of managed distance and arriving gardens and estate offices and corridor conversations and a cut dress and a ballroom, and have it be not uncomfortable. It required a certain amount of fit, she thought, a certain amount of compatible quiet. She had not expected that. She was on her 3rd page when he said, quietly enough that it didn't carry, "Lady Prewitt knew your mother." "Yes," Vivienne said, equally quietly. "She was right," he said. "What she said." Vivienne looked at her book. There is a quality," he paused. "I don't mean it the way it sounds in my head. I mean you make rooms more themselves. I noticed it the first evening, when you came in." She was quiet for a moment. "You handed me your coat," she said, "the first evening." "Yes," he said, "I did." "And yet you noticed." "Yes," a pause. "I noticed and I handed you my coat, and he stopped. "I have been thinking about that for 4 days, about what it means that both those things are true." Vivienne looked at the fire. "What does it mean?" she asked. "That I am capable of more than I have been demonstrating," he said. "That is the most honest answer I can give you." She looked at him then, sideways, briefly, the firelight doing something to the angles of his face that she noted and set aside. He was looking at the fire too. Profile, not quite facing her, the expression of a man who had said something true and was letting it sit. "Your mother," she said. He looked at her. "You haven't spoken to her," she said. "Not properly." "No," he said. "When?" He was quiet for a moment. "Tonight after," he paused. "After the house is quiet." Vivienne nodded. "It will not be," he started. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for it to be easy. I'm asking for it to happen." He looked at her for a long moment. "It will happen," he said. She looked back at her book. Around them, Fenimore laughed at something Lady Pruitt said, and Mrs. Alderton's embroidery needle moved in and out of the fabric with small, precise sounds, and the fire shifted and settled, and the room was warm and ordinary and entirely itself. Vivienne turned a page. She was in bed but not asleep at 10:30 when she heard the footsteps in the corridor. Not his, she had learned the sound of his footsteps over 4 days, the particular pace of them, the weight. These were the Duchess's, smaller, more deliberate, the footsteps of a woman who moved through her own house with the certainty of long ownership, moving away from her room, toward the end of the corridor where the Duke's study was. Vivienne lay in the dark and listened to them recede. She thought about what he had said, tonight, after the house is quiet. She thought about him sitting in the drawing room 2 chairs away saying, "I am capable of more than I have been demonstrating," with the fire on his face and the room warm around them. She thought about her father sending her here because he thought there might be a reason. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for some time. But she was not anxious precisely. She was something else, the particular state of a person who has set something in motion and is waiting, not impatiently, not without cost, but with the steady, grounded quality of someone who has decided to trust a thing and is holding to that decision. Outside, the house was quiet. She waited. At 11:30, the footsteps came back. The Duchess's returning, slower now, with a quality she could hear even through the door, even from a distance that was different from before. Not defeated, not diminished. Something that sounded, she thought, like a woman who had set something down. She listened to them pass. Then, a few minutes later, different footsteps, his, unmistakable at the end of the corridor, pausing for a moment outside her door. Not knocking, just present, for the length of a breath, 2 breaths, then moving on. Vivienne lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought that this was perhaps the strangest 4 days of her life, and that she was not, she discovered, sorry about any of it. She closed her eyes. This time she slept. She found out the way she found out most things. Not by asking. By watching, over breakfast, 2 people who had said something true to each other the previous night sitting at the same table and not pretending otherwise. The Duchess came down at 8, unusual, deliberate. She sat at the foot of the table and looked at Vivienne. Vivienne looked back. The sharpness was gone. The assessment. The quiet, patient management. She looked like a woman who had stopped waiting for something. "Good morning," the Duchess said. "Good morning," Vivienne said. Different from every good morning before it. Neither of them made anything of it. The Duke came down at 10 past, the look of a man who had actually slept, which was different from yesterday's garden hollowness. Someone who had put something down and felt the weight of his own hands for the first time in a while. He sat, poured his coffee, looked at Vivienne once, briefly, directly, and then at his plate. She ate her toast. Fenimore arrived and began talking about the weather with the focused enthusiasm of a man determined to fill a silence he didn't understand with something harmless. Nobody said anything that mattered. Everything that mattered had already been said. She found him in the library at 10. He was at the desk with a letter and he looked up when she came in and said, "Close the door." She closed it. "She didn't know," he said, "about the dress." Vivienne went still. "The scissors, it wasn't she didn't do it herself. She asked someone to." He paused. One of the housemaids, a girl who has been here 3 years and has been doing small things for her. The girl came to me this morning before I could find her, which took considerable courage, and she told me everything." Vivienne said nothing. "I don't say this to diminish it," he said. "The dress was cut because my mother wanted it cut. The fact that she used someone else's hands doesn't change what it was." He looked up. "I am not offering you a smaller version of this because it's easier." "I know," Vivienne said. "I spoke with her last night for a long time." He looked at the window. "She said things I have been waiting a long time to hear her say, about my father, about what she has been doing since. She did not excuse herself. She tried to once early on, and I told her I didn't want excuses, and she stopped." He paused. "She is not a bad woman. I think you may have already understood that." "I understood it yesterday afternoon," Vivienne said. "In the corridor." He looked at her. "She spoke to you." "Yes." "She didn't tell me." "She wouldn't," Vivienne said. "It was between her and me." He nodded, the acknowledgement of a man learning where his edges were and finding them reasonable. "What did you say to her?" Vivienne asked. "Last night, what did you actually say?" He was quiet for a moment. "I told her I had been a coward," he said. "That is the word I used, and I meant it. That I had known for a long time what she was doing and allowed it because it was easier. Because I was afraid." "Of what?" Vivienne asked. "Of being like my father," he said, "who trusted easily and was hurt by it, and also of not being like him, of being so careful that I became incapable of." He stopped. He was capable of very great feeling. It cost him sometimes, but he was capable of it. He looked up. "I have spent 11 years making myself incapable." "You're not incapable," Vivienne said. He looked at her. "You walked around the garden the long way this morning," she said. "You poured my tea with the correct amount of milk. You said I understand the difference on a balcony at 10:30 when you could have said something easier." She paused. "You are not incapable." He held her gaze. "I told her I was going to start making my own decisions," he said. "About the estate, the correspondence, about everything she had been managing." He looked at the window. She cried. I had not seen her cry since my father died. I didn't know what to do with it. "What did you do?" Vivienne asked. "I sat with her," he said, "until she stopped." A silence. "The housemaid," Vivienne said, "the one who came to you." "I'm not going to dismiss her," he said immediately. "Good," she said. "Thank you." They were in the library for another hour. Not working. Talking, not about the estate or the boundary, but the way people talk when they have been moving around each other carefully for long enough and have decided to stop. He told her about his father. Small things, specific things, the way he laughed, a particular walk they had taken, a book still on the desk in the east wing with a page turned down. Vivienne told him about her mother. Lady Prewitt's words still present, she made rooms more themselves, and she found she wanted to give him something of that. Not the grief, but the woman herself. He listened the way he listened to everything fully, without the performance of it. At some point they had moved from their respective positions to the 2 armchairs by the window, which had happened gradually enough that neither of them had decided it. At some point Hargrove appeared in the doorway, looked at both of them and withdrew without a word. At 11:45 she said, "My father wants to meet you." He looked at her. "He will pretend he is coming about the boundary survey," she said. "He won't be coming about the boundary survey." Something moved across his face, the ghost of a smile, fuller this time. "I suspected as much." "He is not subtle," she said. "He thinks he is, he isn't." "No father is," he said, "when it matters. He will ask you difficult questions pleasantly, which makes them more difficult. He will also, at some point, tell you a very long story about a horse that seems to have no point and does have a point, and the point will be about character." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "I look forward to it," he said. She glanced at him. He was looking at her directly, the unguarded look, nothing managed, and she felt it the way you feel the sun come through a window. "He'll come on Thursday," she said, "if I write today." "Then write today," he said. Neither of them moved. The fire crackled. Outside, the groundskeeper moved along one of the paths, unhurried, entirely unconcerned with what was happening in the room above him. "Vivienne," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Yes what?" he said. "Yes," she said, "you may call me that." The smile came fully this time, real, unguarded, considerably more affecting than she had anticipated. "James," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Not yet," she said. He accepted this without flinching. "Fair," he said. She stood, picked up her unread book and walked to the door. "I'll write to my father this afternoon," she said. "Have Hargrove prepare the East Room. My father has opinions about rooms." "What kind of opinions?" "That a room should look like someone lives in it," she said. "Not like someone is about to. He will notice if it looks staged." "Noted," he said. "Vivienne," he said. She stopped, turned. He looked at her across the library, the fire behind him, the survey maps still on the desk, the winter light through the tall windows. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." She looked at him for a moment. "I stayed for breakfast," she said. "And then I stayed for the garden, and then I stayed for the boundary survey." A pause. "And then I just stayed." "Yes," he said, "I know." "You're welcome," she said. She went out and closed the door. Her father arrived at 2:30. Not in the morning. He had written that he would come after noon, which meant he arrived in a carriage that had seen better decades and a coat that had seen better centuries, with the expression of a man who had been looking forward to something for a considerable time and was doing his best not to show it. He was not doing his best very well. Vivienne met him in the entrance hall. He was taller than she remembered. He always seemed taller when she had been away from him, with her mother's coloring and the particular quality of a man who walked into rooms the way Weather walked into rooms. Fully, without apology, completely himself. He saw her and his face did the thing it always did. "Vivi," he said. "Papa," she said. He embraced her with the straightforward thoroughness of a man who had decided affection was not something to be measured carefully, and had lived accordingly. Then he stepped back and looked around the entrance hall. "Nice house," he said. "Wants more books." "The library has considerable books," she said. "A house should have books outside the library," he said, with the conviction of a man who had books in every room including 2 in the kitchen. "Otherwise it's just storage." "I'll pass that along," she said. He looked at her, she looked back. "Where is he?" her father said. The Duke was in the drawing room. Vivienne had told him 2:30, which meant he had been there since 1:15. She filed this away under information useful. He stood when they came in. Her father stopped in the doorway and looked at him the way he looked at horses, not rudely, but thoroughly, the kind of look that missed very little. The Duke looked back. He did not look away first. "Your Grace," her father said. "Mr. Alcott, thank you for coming. I hope the journey was comfortable." "It was cold," her father said pleasantly. "The road from the North Crossing is rutted badly past the 2nd-mile marker. You should know that it's your boundary." "I'll have it looked at," the Duke said. "See that you do." Her father sat in the armchair nearest the fire without being invited and said, "Sit down, both of you. I want tea and I want to talk about the boundary survey, and I want to do both without standing." Hargrove appeared in the doorway and withdrew to produce tea. The boundary survey took 20 minutes. Her father produced his documents from his coat pocket with the slightly triumphant air of a man whose patience had finally been rewarded. The Duke produced Hargrove's folder. They spread things on the table, and her father pointed to the discrepancy with the direct efficiency of a man who had not come here to be diplomatic, and did not intend to begin now. "Here," he said, "and here, the 1809 survey and your 1831 estate record, they don't agree." "I know," the Duke said. "I've looked at both." Her father looked at him. "Since when?" "Since Tuesday morning. Your daughter brought it to my attention." Her father looked at Vivienne. She looked at the fire. He looked back at the Duke. "What do you intend to do about it?" Accept the 1809 survey as definitive, the Duke said. The error is ours. We'll correct the records and address the drainage easements at the same time. That's 40 feet of grazing land, her father said. Yes, I'm aware. You're not going to argue it. No, the Duke said. It's not mine to argue. Her father looked at him for a long moment. All right, he said. He folded his documents and put them back in his pocket. Then he picked up his tea and said, "Tell me about your father." The Duke went very still, not visibly, nothing anyone who didn't know how to look would notice. But Vivienne noticed, and she thought her father noticed, and she thought this was precisely why he had asked. "What would you like to know?" the Duke said. "What kind of man he was." "He felt things very completely," the Duke said slowly. "He did not do anything by half. When he trusted someone, he trusted them entirely." He looked at the fire. "It cost him sometimes, but he was a good man, in the way that matters most. He was honest about what he was." Her father drank his tea. "You found his letter," he said. The Duke looked at him sharply. "Vivienne told me," her father said without apology. "Not the contents, just that you went back into that room." He paused. "I'm glad you did." "He wrote that he hoped I would learn to tell the difference," the Duke said, "between people worth trusting and people who weren't. He said he had learned it too late." "And have you," her father said, "learned it?" The Duke looked at Vivienne. She was looking at the fire. "I am learning it," he said. "I think that is the most honest answer." Her father nodded. "Good," he said. "That's the only answer worth giving." The horse story came at 4 o'clock. Vivienne had excused herself at 3:30. Letters to write, she said, which was true, and she thought they needed an hour without her in it, which she did not say, but her father understood from the specific way she said the letters part. She came back at 4:05. Her father was in the middle of a story about a horse named Pemberton, bought at auction in 1803 for 3 times what it was worth, ridden for 11 years, sold when he was old and slow for exactly what her father had paid. The Duke was listening, not politely, actually listening, tracking something beneath the story. Her father reached the part where Pemberton, in his final year, had kicked down 3 fences, bitten 2 grooms, and thrown her father once in a muddy field in October, and her father had gotten up out of the mud and decided not to sell him. "Why not?" the Duke asked. "Because when something is worth something, it doesn't stop being worth something because it's difficult." He paused. "And because it's easy to sell a difficult horse. Anyone can do that. What takes something is deciding the difficulty is part of what you're keeping, that you want the actual thing." He looked at the Duke with the clear directness of a man who had spent 61 years saying exactly what he meant. "My daughter is not easy," he said. "I know," the Duke said. "She holds things to account. She does not move quickly with trust. She does not forgive cheaply." He looked at the fire. "She also, when she has decided something, does not go back on it without a reason." A pause. "I sent her here because I thought there might be a reason. I don't mean the land." The Duke was very still. "I am not asking what your intentions are," her father said. "She would consider that uncivilized and she would be right. I am telling you what she is, so you understand the actual thing." "I understand it," the Duke said quietly. Her father looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly. "Good," he said. "That's all I needed." Vivienne came back into the room and sat beside her father. "Was it Pemberton?" she said. "It was always Pemberton," her father said. "I told him it would be," she said to the Duke. The Duke looked at her. "You did." Her father made the sound he made when something pleased him, and he was trying not to show it and failing. He put his arm around her shoulders briefly, and she leaned into it for a moment. She did not look at the foot of the table, where the Duchess sat quietly through dinner with her pearls and her changed expression, raising her glass when her father raised his and saying nothing at all. But she drank. Her father left at 10. He held her by the shoulders at the door and looked at her face. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. "Is there a reason?" he said. Yes, she said. He nodded, released her, picked up his hat. The road wants fixing, he said to the Duke. I'll see to it this week, the Duke said. Her father looked at him one last time, the clear, plain look of a man who had decided something and wanted the other person to know it. Then he got in his carriage and drove away down the rutted road in the dark. Vivienne stood in the entrance hall and listened until the sound was gone entirely. She turned. The Duke was 2 feet away. James, she said. His expression shifted entirely, completely, the recognition of what she was giving him. Yes, he said. The road, she said. Don't forget. He smiled, the full smile, the real one. I won't forget, he said. She went upstairs. Behind her, she heard him stand in the entrance hall for a moment, just present, just there, and then follow. The last guests left on Friday morning. Fenimore lingered over breakfast with the slightly pained expression of a young man who had arrived expecting a pleasant few days, and was leaving with the sense that something significant had happened around him, and he had been present for all of it without fully understanding any of it. He shook the Duke's hand at the door, and then turned to Vivienne, and said, with the abrupt honesty of someone who had been composing something for several days, I'm glad you stayed, the first morning when you could have left. He paused. I think it mattered. Thank you, Fenimore, she said. He nodded, got into his carriage, drove away with the slightly dazed expression of a young man who was going to be thinking about this house party for some considerable time. The house was quiet now. Just the 3 of them, and the staff, and the winter light, and the specific quality of a large house after all the guests have gone, and the rooms are finding their way back to their actual shapes. She found the Duke in the library at 10. He was at the desk with a letter, and he looked up when she came in and said, "Close the door." She closed it. She didn't know, he said, about the dress. Vivienne went still. The scissors, she didn't do it herself. She asked someone to. He paused. One of the housemaids, a girl who has been here 3 years. She came to me before I could find her and told me everything. I don't say this to diminish it, he said. The dress was cut because my mother wanted it cut. The fact that she used someone else's hands doesn't change what it was. He looked up. I am not offering you a smaller version. I know, Vivienne said. I spoke with her last night. He looked at the window. She said things I have been waiting a long time to hear. She did not excuse herself. She tried to once, and I told her I didn't want excuses, and she stopped. He paused. She is not a bad woman. I know, Vivienne said. I understood that yesterday, in the corridor. He nodded, the acknowledgement of a man learning where his edges were and finding them reasonable. What did you actually say to her? Vivienne asked. Last night. I told her I had been a coward, he said. That is the word I used, and I meant it. That I had known what she was doing and allowed it because it was easier. Because I was afraid of being like my father, who trusted easily and was hurt by it. And also of not being like him. Of becoming so careful I turned into something that couldn't. He stopped. He was capable of very great feeling. I have spent 11 years making myself incapable. You're not incapable, Vivienne said. He looked at her. You walked around the garden the long way. You poured my tea correctly. You said I understand the difference on a balcony when you could have said something easier. She paused. You are not incapable. He held her gaze for a moment. I told her I was going to start making my own decisions, he said. About everything she had been managing. She cried. I had not seen her cry since my father died. What did you do? Vivienne asked. I sat with her, he said, until she stopped. A silence. The housemaid, Vivienne said. I'm not dismissing her, he said immediately. Good, she said. Thank you. She was crossing the main hall at 2:30 when the Duchess found her. They walked. I have been thinking about what to say to you since Tuesday, the Duchess said. I rehearsed several versions. None of them were right. The unrehearsed ones usually aren't either, Vivienne said, but they're more honest. Yes, the Duchess said. I suppose that's the point. She came further into the corridor and stopped. I told James I had been afraid, she said. That is true, but I want to say something to you that I did not say to him. Vivienne waited. I was also jealous, the Duchess said. The words sat between them, plain, undecorated, the kind that costs something to say. Not of you specifically, she said. Of the idea of you, someone coming in and changing the shape of things, someone who would be the person he turned to rather than. She stopped. I have been the person he turned to for 11 years. I know it was not right. I know it was not good for him, but I had built myself around it, around being necessary. She paused, and I was afraid of what I would be without it. Vivienne looked at the corridor ahead. That is not a justification, the Duchess said. I offer it because I think you deserve the full account, not the managed version. The dress, Vivienne said. I cannot find the right words for what that was, the Duchess said. There are no right words. No, Vivienne said, there aren't. A silence. I am sorry, the Duchess said. Plain, no qualification, no careful architecture, just the words carrying their full weight. Vivienne looked at her, the pearls, the precise hair, the expression of a woman who had decided to be seen and was holding to it even though it cost her. I know you are, she said. I don't move quickly with forgiveness. I think you should know that. Yes, the Duchess said quietly. But I'm not interested in keeping score, Vivienne said. What happened, happened. What happens next is what I am interested in. She had said this before to the Duke in the frost-edged garden. She meant it the same way and differently. The same because she hadn't changed her mind. Differently because it cost more to say it here. What happens next, the Duchess said carefully, is that I would like to begin differently, with you, with whatever this becomes. I don't move quickly, Vivienne said. I know, the Duchess said. James told me. A pause. He said you hold things to account. I do. Good, the Duchess said. And then, very quietly, with something in it that was the possibility of warmth rather than warmth itself. I think that is exactly what this family has needed for a very long time. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. My father thinks the house wants more books, she said. Outside the library, the Duchess blinked. He has books beside his bath, Vivienne said. I think he would consider that the standard. Something moved across the Duchess's face, unexpected, unmanaged. Not quite a smile. The thing that came before a smile in a person who had not smiled genuinely for some time. That seems excessive, the Duchess said. It is, Vivienne said. He is, she paused. You'll like him eventually. You think so? He is exactly as difficult as you are, Vivienne said, in entirely different directions. The Duchess looked at the corridor ahead. The not-quite smile had shifted into something more definite, small still but real. I see, she said. You'll be fine, Vivienne said. She found James in the East Wing at noon. Not the library, the small sitting room at the end of the corridor. Curtains open, fire unlit, papers on the desk 11 years undisturbed. He was at the window with his hands in his coat pockets. He heard her come in. She crossed to the fireplace and lit the fire herself, tinderbox on the mantel, a skill she had had since she was 12, and he turned when he heard the strike of the tinder. She got it going, stood, brushed her hands on her skirts. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said. I know, he said. The solicitors will need to meet, about the boundary and the easements, several weeks to arrange properly. Yes, he said. After that there will likely be further meetings, she said, the nature of which will depend on a number of factors. Yes, he said. One of those factors, she said, is whether you write to me, the way you actually write, not the way a duke writes to a landowner. She held his gaze. I think you know what I mean. I know what you mean, he said. He crossed the room, not quickly, with the full weight of having decided, and stopped in front of her with the fire behind her and the window behind him. Are you willing to, do you want this? He said. Not the land, this. She thought about Tuesday morning and the frost on the grass, the correct amount of milk, the long way around the garden. I understand the difference. She thought about her father's horse. When something is worth something, it doesn't stop being worth something because it's difficult. Yes, she said. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to decide otherwise, and took her hand. She let him. His grip was careful, exactly what it was supposed to be. They stood by the fire in the east sitting room in the winter noon light, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the fire and the held hand and the 11 years of the room around them were not already saying better. After a while she said, "The fire needs more wood." "I'll get it," he said. He did not let go of her hand to do it. She looked at the window and smiled privately, just briefly. Then she let him keep holding her hand while he reached for the wood, which was impractical and slightly awkward and entirely fine. More than fine, she thought. That evening she sat in the main library with her book, and he sat 2 chairs away with his correspondence, and the fire burned well, and nobody said anything for a long time. At 9:30, he set down his letter. "My father used to say you could tell the quality of a person by how they occupied silence." "What did he say about you?" Vivienne asked. "That I occupied it like a man guarding a door." She looked up. "What does he say now?" she asked. He looked at the fire for a moment. "I think," he said, "that he would say I had finally opened it." She looked at him. He looked back. She turned another page. "Good," she said. She was packed by 7. Not because she was eager to leave. She had established this fact clearly enough in her own mind that she did not need to establish it again. But because she had always packed her own trunks, and she had always done it the night before, and she had always been ready before the household was fully awake. And these were habits she had built over years of being in houses that were not hers, and she saw no reason to abandon them now. Goss had helped with the heavier trunk and then gone to bed, and Vivienne had finished the rest herself, the careful, methodical work of a woman who knew exactly where everything went and had opinions about the order of it. She had folded the altered dress last. She held it for a moment before she put it in. The asymmetric hem, the 3 small tucks at the waist, the work of 2 hours and a practical woman with a sewing kit and strong opinions about what was possible. She folded it carefully and put it on top and closed the trunk. Then she had sat in the chair by the window for a long time and looked at the dark grounds and thought about tomorrow and the solicitors and the correspondence that would follow and the specific, unglamorous, necessary work of building something between 2 people who were starting from an unusual position and had decided to build anyway. She had not slept until late. She did not mind. The morning was gray. Not the clear cold of the previous days, a different kind of winter morning, the sky low and flat and the light diffuse, the kind of morning that did not commit to anything. The grounds were very still. The gravel drive lay pale and precise, waiting. Vivienne came downstairs at 7:30 with the quiet efficiency of a woman who knew what she was doing and why and did not require the morning to be more than it was. The breakfast room was empty. She poured her tea, sat, looked at the window. She had been sitting for perhaps 10 minutes when she heard footsteps. She knew them, had learned them over 6 days without meaning to, and the door opened. He came in and stopped when he saw her. He looked, she thought, exactly as she felt, present, slightly tired, entirely decided. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she said. He sat not at the head of the table, not at the far end. 2 chairs away, the same distance as the library, the same distance as the drawing room, the distance they had developed without discussing it that meant close enough to talk, far enough to breathe. He poured his coffee. They sat in the gray morning quiet and drank their respective things and did not speak for a while, which was comfortable in the way that things are comfortable when they have been earned. Then he said, "I wrote the letter last night." She looked at him. "The one you asked for," he said, "the other kind." He looked at his coffee. "I wrote 3 versions. The first was managed, the second was better, the third I sealed before I could revise it again." He paused. "It's on the hall table with your other correspondence." Vivienne set down her teacup. She looked at the window for a moment. "I'll read it in the carriage," she said. Yes, he said, I thought you might. A silence. Was it? She started. It was honest, he said. I can't tell you more than that without telling you all of it, and I'd rather you read it. She nodded. The gray morning sat outside the window, unhurried, uncommitted. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked. Somewhere in the grounds a bird tested the air and thought better of it. Hargrove has the solicitor's contact, she said, for the boundary meetings. He should write to Mr. Foss directly. Foss prefers directness. He finds intermediaries inefficient. I'll tell him, he said. The drainage work will need to start before spring, she said, before the ground freezes properly. My father's tenant in the south field has had 2 wet seasons. It shouldn't be a third. It won't be, he said. Good, she said. She was doing it, she knew. She was filling the space before leaving with practical things because practical things were easier than the other kind. Because she could say the drainage work and before spring and Mr. Foss prefers directness, and not have to say the thing that was underneath all of it. The thing that had been underneath all of it since Tuesday morning and that she had said once, clearly, in the east sitting room yesterday. And did not need to say again but felt very present this morning in the gray light with the carriage coming at 9. He knew she was doing it. She knew he knew. Neither of them stopped her. The Duchess came down at 8. Vivienne had half expected her not to, had thought it equally possible that she would manage her exit from a distance, the way she managed most things, a note perhaps, or simply an absence that said what a presence would have said with less cost. She had not been certain which version she would get and had decided she would accept either. She got neither. The Duchess came in at 8 o'clock in her dark gray dress with her hair precisely done and sat at the foot of the table and poured her tea and said to Vivienne directly, I would like to call on you, in London, if you will permit it. Vivienne looked at her. Not immediately, the Duchess said. I am not asking to arrive on your doorstep next week. I am asking whether in time when it seems, she paused, choosing carefully, appropriate, you would be willing to receive me. Vivienne thought about the corridor on Wednesday afternoon, the scissors and the full account, and there are no right words. She thought about what it had cost the Duchess to come downstairs this morning and ask this directly instead of through a note or an absence. Yes, she said, I would be willing. The Duchess nodded. She picked up her tea. She did not say anything else about it, which was, Vivienne thought, exactly right. At 8:45, Hargrove appeared in the doorway and said the carriage was being brought round, and Vivienne went upstairs for her coat and her gloves and the small bag Goss had kept out, and when she came back down the hall, her trunks were already at the door and Goss was outside with the footman and the gray morning was waiting. The letter was on the hall table. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected, not thick, not many pages, but the paper was good and his handwriting pressed firmly, the writing of a man who had meant every word and had not second-guessed the pressure of the pen. She looked at her name on the front, Miss Alcott, and then below it in smaller letters as though he had decided to add it and then decided not to take it back. Vivienne. She put it in her bag. She would read it in the carriage, as she had said. She looked up. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Not with anything in his hands, no letter, no document, no practical reason for standing there. Just standing, coat on, as though he had put the coat on without fully deciding to and had arrived at the hall because that was where she was. She crossed the hall. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her, the full, unguarded look, everything present, nothing managed. The road, she said. I'll see to it this week, he said. And the drainage before spring. Before spring, he said. And the east sitting room, she said. It should be used, it's a good room. Something moved across his face, the recognition of what she was giving him by saying it, the specific weight of it. Yes, he said quietly, it is. She looked at him, he looked at her. She thought about all the things she could say. There were several. She had been composing them intermittently for 6 days, some of them precise, some of them true, some of them both. She thought about what her father had said about Pemberton and what Lady Prewitt had said about her mother, and what the Duchess had said about being afraid and what James had said about opening a door. She thought about a dress that had been made into something better than it was before. She put out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, just a moment, the pause of a man who had expected something and received something else and was deciding whether it was better or worse than what he expected, and arriving, she could see, at better. He took her hand, shook it formally, correctly, the handshake of two people conducting business, except that he held it 1 second longer than a handshake required. And she let him. "Right well," she said. "I already have," he said. She looked at him one last time, fully, the look she gave things she was deciding to keep, and then she walked out the front door and down the stone steps, and Goss handed her into the carriage, and the door closed and the carriage began to move down the drive. She sat back, took the letter from her bag, held it for a moment without opening it, just held it, the weight of it, the good paper and the firm handwriting and her name in 2 versions on the front. Outside the carriage window, the gravel drive gave way to the road that needed fixing. The road her father had been telling people about for 2 years, and that would be fixed this week, because she had said before spring and he had said before spring, and that was, she had decided how they were going to do this, one practical thing at a time, one letter at a time, one honest word at a time, until the shape of it became clear. She opened the letter. She read it once quickly. Then she sat back and looked at the gray winter fields moving past the carriage window and felt something settle in her chest, not resolve, not certainty. Both of those would take time, and she was prepared to give them time. Something quieter than that. Something that had the quality of a beginning rather than an end. Something that was not yet anything. But that was not nothing either. At the bottom of the last page he had written in smaller letters than the rest, as though he had added it after he thought he was finished. "The east sitting room has a good fire now. I thought you should know." She folded the letter, put it back in her bag, looked at the road ahead. She smiled privately for herself just briefly. Then she settled in for the journey. 7 months later the road was fixed. Her father drove it in June, and wrote to her that evening with the slightly aggrieved satisfaction of a man whose point had finally been proven, and who intended to enjoy it moderately, and then not mention it again for approximately 1 month. She was reading his letter at her writing desk when the second letter arrived, delivered separately, by a different hand, on the better paper with the firm handwriting she had been receiving every week for 7 months and reading in the carriage on the first occasion and at her desk on every subsequent one. She set her father's letter aside. She opened this one. She read it. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk and the letter in front of her, and the summer afternoon coming through the window at the angle it came through in June, warm and long, and entirely committed in the way the gray November morning had not been. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote for 15 minutes. Not the careful, precise, practical letters she had been writing for 7 months. The ones about solicitors and boundary surveys and drainage reports. And yes, the east bedroom is comfortable, thank you, and no, my father's horse opinions have not moderated. Not that kind. The other kind. The kind he had asked for in November and that she had been giving him, slowly, in pieces, as she was ready, one honest word at a time. She sealed it, set it with the Morning Post. She sat for a moment longer and thought about 7 months of letters and 1 meeting of solicitors in February and 1 dinner in March at which her father had told the Pemberton story again to the Duchess, who had listened with the expression of a woman being surprised into amusement for the second time and had said afterward to Vivienne, very quietly, "He is exactly as difficult as I am, in entirely different directions." And Vivienne had said, "I told you." And the Duchess had said, "Yes, you did." She thought about a letter on a hall table and a carriage on a gray morning, and a handshake that lasted 1 second longer than it needed to. She thought about from here. 3 days later she arrived at Ashford Manor. Not for a house party, not with a letter of introduction or a solicitor's instructions or any of the practical architecture that had brought her the first time. Just the carriage, just Goss, just herself. Hargrove met her at the door. "Miss Alcott," he said, with the precise correctness that was his particular form of warmth. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "is everything in order?" "Everything," he said, "is in order." She walked into the entrance hall. It was summer now, the light entirely different from November, warm and amber through the tall windows, the grounds visible beyond the glass as a living thing rather than the bare, precise thing they had been. Flowers in the vases, the portraits in better light. The house entirely itself in the way houses are in summer, opened up, present, unheld. She looked at the hall table. There was a book on it. A single book, set there with the deliberateness of something that had been chosen and placed rather than left. She picked it up. It was a novel she had mentioned in a letter in April, in passing, the kind of mention that had not been a request, just a thought, and he had found it, and he had left it here where she would see it when she arrived, which was either very simple or very not, and she had decided some time ago it was the latter. She held it. "Vivienne," she turned. He was at the far end of the hall, not at the stairs, not at the door. Simply there in the amber summer light, having arrived at the hall because that was where she was, because that was what he did. She looked at him across the hall. He looked back. She held up the book. He said nothing, just watched her with the full, unguarded look and the quiet of a man who had been waiting for something for 7 months and had learned over those months that the waiting had been exactly the right thing and was not sorry for any of it. She walked toward him. She stopped in front of him. She put out her hand. He took it. Not a handshake this time. Just her hand in his, warm, careful, the right amount of pressure, exactly what it was supposed to be. "The drainage," she said. "Finished in March," he said. "Your father's tenant had a good spring." "Good," she said. "The roads." "My father told me," she said. "He's planning a speech." "I know," he said. "He wrote to me." She looked at him. "He wrote to you," she said. "He writes to me every 2 weeks," he said. "Mostly about the road, also about Pemberton." "Of course he does," she said. She looked at their joined hands, then at the summer light through the tall windows, then at him. "The east sitting room," she said. "Warm," he said. "I've been using it every morning." "Good," she said again. He was still watching her with the full, unguarded look, not waiting for anything, she thought, not hoping for anything, simply present, simply there, simply the actual thing, unchanged and not pretending to be otherwise. She looked at him for a long moment. "James," she said. "Yes," he said. She reached up with her free hand and straightened his lapel. It did not particularly need straightening, but her hand was there and so was the lapel, and it gave her something to do with the moment that was not the thing she was about to do. Then she did the thing she was about to do. She kissed him, briefly, precisely, exactly what it was supposed to be. He was very still for 1 second. Then he was not still at all. Somewhere in the house, Hargrove was in the estate office with his ledger. He turned to a new page. He wrote the date at the top. He wrote nothing else. He did not need to. He closed the ledger, put it away, and went to tell the kitchen that Miss Alcott would be staying for dinner. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.